So in the last 48 hours, two things have happened: Twitter and Reddit. Let me first just address the incredibly based posts Capcom have released in the last 2 days. Now the first one literally says Dragon's Dogma 2 in all lowercase. That's gotta be the most epic big brain marketing move I've seen in a long time. And it's working. This post got over 500,000 impressions in 1 day. What's not so great is that many of these comments are complaining about the game being locked at 30 FPS on consoles, and the fact that we only have one save slot. Now bear in mind that this is Twitter, and it's probably not an accurate representation of the Dogma community, but that brings me to these other posts over on Reddit, which is in my opinion a better mix of the actual player base. From my understanding, there are 3 main topics these discussions revolve around. Can you see the difference between 30 and 60 FPS? Is it possible that this rumor is true? And why won't Dragon's Dogma 2 run at 60 FPS when Elden Ring, Horizon Forbidden West and Resident Evil can? Let's start with the 3060 discussion, since this is the topic that by far creates the most emotional turmoil amongst people. Now personally, I started playing both Dragon's Dogma and Dark Souls on the PlayStation 3, so 30 FPS was the standard I played on for many years, and that was perfectly fine. 4 years ago, I got my first PC with an RTX 2060 GPU, and since then I've been trying to get the best quality out of the games I play, with around 40 to 60 FPS on average. From my experience, I only really notice low FPS when it drops below 30. Around 40 FPS is the sweet spot for me when it comes to an optimal experience balancing quality and performance. Now what's interesting with the graphics card I've been using all these years is that its performance is very similar to what you find in your PS5, and therefore I think my experience with both 2K and 4K gameplay in Dark Arisen can give us an insight on what performance we should expect in the sequel. Let's take a look at the official requirements we have gotten for Dragon's Dogma 2. Now the minimum recs are the most important baseline for us, and the first thing we need to look at is the graphics card needed to achieve a goal of 30 FPS when playing at 1080p resolution. When comparing the GTX 1070 to the RTX 2070, we see that there is a 23% increase in frames per second in a 2070 test, which is comparable to what a PS5 would output in comparison. This is of course just a thought exercise, and we won't know for sure until we get the official console specs from Capcom, but let's continue. Going with the number we have here, a 23% increase from 30 FPS would then translate into 37 FPS on a PS5, and taking into account that when developers give out these minimum requirement specs, they usually get higher FPS numbers in their own tests, and we would expect Capcom to do the same here. If they actually average around 40 FPS in their tests, then we could expect around 50 FPS on a PS5. So just from looking at this, I would say that the chances are low we'll get 60 FPS locked on consoles, but it would make sense for Capcom to give players the choice to reduce quality for a performance mode that could lock at 45 FPS or even 60 FPS with the right settings. Now, games like Elden Ring, Horizon Forbidden West and Resident Evil have been compared to Dragon's Dogma 2, and people are complaining about these games getting 60 FPS without problem, while DD2 is struggling with only 30 FPS. I would say the Elden Ring comparison is the only fair discussion, since it's an open world game with pretty similar graphical fidelity. Although I have to say that Dragon's Dogma 2 got the edge when it comes to details and effects quality. I don't think Horizon have a comparable enemy density on the map to really be a fair comparison, and Resident Evil isn't even an open world game, ending up much less GPU intensive overall. Here are the RE4 remaster recs just for comparison. To try and answer why I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is so GPU intensive, I would say it's a combination of a massive open world, towns filled with highly detailed NPCs, and of course your pawns and the advanced AI that runs in the background that might be the bottleneck.